38 countries over the last 40 years in people development. And I recently had a dance with cancer and asked myself, did I actually make a difference in people's lives? And that started me looking at the research in how organizations and particularly learning and development functions can measure whether they're making a difference. The research didn't immediately answer the question, but what it started was a train of looking for examples of good practice and ways that organizations can align their learning and development function to people development and to business development. So the alignment is both organizational development and people development. I looked at the scale of the problem initially. I'm doing a professional doctorate in learning transfer and wanted to see what the actual problem. These are examples from the States, but they're replicated in a lot of countries. And in the States in 2018, $1,340.39 billion was spent on training. And the delivery methods were fairly broad, and those now, because they were 2018, have been added to with things like the development of open learning materials as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. But the actual cost, the wastage, is $107 billion. And work that we did in Europe said that 90 billion euros is being wasted. Those estimates, those estimates are based on research by Georgeson as late as 1982, where he says that 10% of training results in behavioral change. Mary Bell and Sachs in 2002 said that that was 10 to 30% of training results in a behavioral change, and hence the assumption is then that results for the company and for the individual. But Sachs said that 40% of trainees fail to transfer immediately after training, and 70% falter in the first year after the program, which says the enormous importance of managing learning transfer. And ultimately, only 50% of training investments results in organizational individual improvement. The issue is we're on a burning rig. Lots of people know that it's burning, and lots of people know what to do, but they're not doing it. The issue for me is that there are three key components in looking at learning transfer, and HR is really in the middle of it. Their role is to provide fit between the business strategy, the alignment of all the policies, processes, and practices, the engagement and commitment of all the stakeholders, in order to establish data to evaluate its contribution to the business. And you see a model developed by Wang that says the host system is underpinned by the HR system, and all the input, process, and outputs need to be aligned with the business strategy. The problem with the business strategy is sometimes there are some implicit assumptions behind the business strategy. And in my experience, organizations put their policies and practices around three broad definitions of the world in which they live. Some organizations, particularly in finance, believe the world is a competitive organization. They build on the best, so they look for best practices. They replicate that in terms of establishing those best practices by competency analysis and behavioral change. And what they look for is conforming to that particular pattern. Do we deal with the two participants now, or do we wait till the end, Ali?
Well, I guess we should wait till the end.
Okay. I spent 10 years in the chemical industry and was an executive director and a general manager for a multinational chemical company. When we had a sulfate process, we used to produce TiO2, a pigment that goes into paint and plastics. What we were looking for in our slow processes, a sulfate process, where the decision time was 24 hours, if you had a problem at one end of the factory, you could work it out before it got very serious, because the decision time was long. What we wanted our operators to do was to conform to particular practices and procedures. So our system was built around compliance. Conversely, we had a different process, a high technology process built on chloride technology, a pretty volatile chemical, and it was heated by a plasma arc that burned at about 2000 degrees centigrade. You couldn't get, the decision time was in nanoseconds, and you couldn't show them the burner because it was too dangerous. What we had to do was develop understanding, because if you simply train for compliance, people can follow a set procedure, but if that set procedure changes, then they can't apply their new learning because it's different circumstances. What you need to do is develop understanding in people. The cooperation came from when you've got competition externally, but what you need is cooperation internally. You want people to solve customer problems, to innovate. There you can't stay at compliance. You've got to go into helping people understand what's happening in a changing environment and get them to contribute to solutions in teams. The third assumptions, and they're broad assumptions, they're not pure, but they're broad, is where you want collaboration, where there's cooperation externally and collaboration internally. Example of that would be medical devices, a company that I worked with recently that provided the masks for the ventilators that are used in operating theaters. What they moved their strategy towards was much more collaboration. They were looking for ways of problem solving with their competitors and their customers to help them change the way that they were doing. What they wanted was challenge the existing ideas and value diversity. And when I was working with this chemical company in research and development, we were looking for new products to build on. What we were looking for was not the old style of management, which was about enforcing and compliance, but for challenging existing ways of doing it. Now, my argument is a lot of companies have those assumptions underpinning their business strategy. If we're looking for behavioral change, we want measurement systems that actually reflect the strategic alignment of people development in the business. We don't just want people to conform, we want them engaged, we want them to add meaning to what they're doing, and we want commitment. So that requires us to move from a reactive measurement system of getting things done to a standardized system, be consistent, through to a focus system where you want alignment with the business and the business leaders. And you want to drive the business finally in a strategic view where you've got predictive analytics and you want workforce planning. What's also happening around is the world of learning and the world of work is changing, particularly with coronavirus, where open learning material is being used, more responsibility is being placed on the individual to learn for themselves, and we're moving from formal training programs into more informal. The formal learning is usually conducted within an organization, usually within a classroom, run by an expert, and involves a validation and certification process. Whereas informal learning is spontaneous, self-directed, continuous, and lifelong. The world is changing and it's moving. And Tavistock in 2001 said, in a rapidly changing world with reducing discrimination between informal and formal learning, learning becomes part of a learner's arena to accelerate their application. And Zuboff, even in 1988, said, the introduction of coaches into workforce makes the distinction between the world of earning and the world of learning less blurring. We're getting to a point where learning and work are combined. And the changing nature of work and learning is not something that requires time out for being engaged in productive activity. Learning is the heart of productive activity. So the workplace is a learning place. Learning transfer is not just an event, but is part of it, and if not the major part of a learning process. So organizations spend 80% of their budget on designing learning programs, whereas that's probably only 20% of the payoff. Most of the payoff in learning transfer is the application of learning and the management of the learning process. Whilst the learning transfer may be considered as an end, in reality, it's a continuous loop. That what you do in the beginning, how you prepare people for learning, has a comeback to you when you're looking at assessment and evaluation. And I'll come back to that later. I started by saying there are three key focuses on the impact of learning. One is the organization and the nature of the business strategy. The second is the delivery and engagement of the learning intervention. So if you're designing a learning intervention, the content, its relevance, its applicability, and whether it's supported are key factors in enabling that learning to be transferred. The final one is the individual learner. Their motivation and capability to apply their learning is fundamental. My professional doctorate in learning transfer has been focusing on that individual learner, been looking at what all the literature says about the personal characteristics of the individual learner. I've come up with 10 that will accelerate their learning by enabling them to take more effective management of their learning interventions and their learning application. I'm going to look at the process of evaluating a learning intervention. And there's a fundamental problem with transfer. According to Lechner in 2008, every estimator makes some generally untestable assumptions in order to overcome the fundamental evaluation problem. Choosing the right identification strategy to obtain reliable estimates of the causal relationship is very context specific. Now, I'm going to take you through Kirkpatrick and Phillips' process, where they talk about a reaction to the learning intervention, the learning that comes after the reaction, the behavioral change that as a result of learning, and the results with the return on investment calculation. Most organizations still only evaluate training programs using criteria reaction. And every measure, let me just move that, and very few measure the impact of training on results. The management of the application of learning is something that most organizations leave to the individual. And whilst the individual may come back enthused from a learning intervention, it may be that the way that they're treated when they get back to that work environment determines their commitment and enthusiasm to continue. They're acting like pioneers. And we all know, we can see evidence of pioneers. They're the ones with the face down in the gutter and arrows in their back. The process according to Collins, even in higher education, in universities, in colleges, is akin to a bo peep who was a shepherdess. And she used to leave them alone and they will come home wagging their tails behind them. And that's often our approach to enabling learning transfer in both training and education. The majority of companies use reaction surveys, happy sheets, to evaluate and assess whether their learning intervention is having impact. Evaluating training often exclusively with satisfaction surveys epitomizes the folly of hoping for competence development whilst rewarding instructors for making students happy. There is no evidence that reaction causes the application of learning. Learning. Learning's not a problem to be solved, but a reality to experienced. So your key there is the individual's willingness and motivation to learn, but learning is about understanding. The issue with applying that learning is it's not only the motivation to learn, but the motivation to apply and transfer. In that way, you're looking for the applicability and the relevance of what people are learning and the connection with the individual. The fourth factor, and again, the link between learning and behavioral change is tenuous. Often what we're looking for is excellent practice, but often the assessment of that practice is done on a one-off basis. It's time-driven, so that it's only done once, and it's not done often in a longevity way for a longer period of time. So people will look at it, the evaluation of a behavioral change over a period of time at different places and often inconsistently. And finally, the coming down to results. Wright and Garoy in 2001 referred to the belief that training leads to improved organizational performance as a myth that equates training with goodness. So the model that uses a learning process with reaction, learning, behavioral change results has lots of issues around the linkage between the process of reaction, learning, behavioral change, and results. It's a bit like examining a process with a microscope. And what you do is you dissect the process, like the input-output process that I talked about by Wang, and you look at the program, individual motivation and capability, the openness and preparedness, and the support. Then you look at during the learning process, the content design, its relevance and applicability, the sorts of pedagogy and delivery technology that you use, and the delivery methods. And you look at then the process of action planning, the engagement back at work, and the support and the organizational culture. According to Lobato and Evans, the classic transfer studies privilege the perspective of the observer and rely on models of expert performance, accepting there is a right mapping. Consequently, transfer experiments can become what Lave called an unnatural laboratory game, in which the task becomes to get the subject to match the experimenter's expectations, rather than an investigation of the process employed as people naturally bring their knowledge to bear on novel problems. It's a bit like a fairground coin machine that you get in gaming places, where you put a penny in, it goes through a series of slots, and you hope it comes out having more impact and adding value. Another way of looking at measuring learning transfer, this is developed by a guy called Holton, that has researched in 24 cultures, has over 50,000 responses, and is called the Learning Transfer Inventory. This dissects the learning process into those three areas again. It talks about that individual motivation and capability, and then it talks about during the content design and relevance, and post. And is a questionnaire built on a traffic light system. So given the questions, the questionnaire is filled in, and what the HR function has is data. Data that tells the perception of those who've been on the program, the 16 key areas that are the critical success factors in any intervention or any learning program. So it gives a score on whether the content is relevant. It gives a score on whether the behavioral objectives can be transferred, and it gives a score on the personal capacity of the individual. Then talks about the motivation of the trainee to transfer, their preparedness, the performance confidence, and the transfer effort that's required to put it in. And then talks about the organizational, the management support, the peer support, the positive outcomes and the negative outcomes of any attempt at applying the learning. So we got here not focused on the individual, but the focus on the learning program and how that individual impacts and how that group impacts with that learning intervention. And after research, the 16 key success factors in a learning intervention that an organization needs to pay attention to. And what this provides is the HR function with data evidence to go back. And I've been in meetings with organizations where the HR function has been there with a line function, and there have been arguments about whose responsibility is to provide development. This provides you with data that enables you to have conversation and integrate the work with your stakeholders in a learning intervention. So it embraces all those who have a commitment. It tells you where there are needs for development, both with the line management and with the learner and with the learning intervention. Once you have that evidence, you can go back to what we've developed in terms of what we call the four Ds. This is an organizational tool. It's web-based. What it looks at is whether the definition of the behaviors that will deliver the business strategy is relevant and applicable. It describes where you have the strategic gap between where you want to be in the future and where you are now. It enables you to design a learning intervention which bridges that gap and focuses the resources on the right areas to enable you to fill that gap. And it delivers focused data-driven change and embeds the application of behavioral change. So all that we've got is a way of looking at the learning process and the training process, defining the needs, establishing behavioral objectives, running a pre-performance test with the individual based on 360-degree behavioral observation from a supervisor. So you've got the ability to look at pre, and then at the end we'll look at post. There's establishing a transfer contract with the line to make sure you've got the commitment to that change process. You deliver your training. We do a transfer diagnosis with the learning transfer system inventory. And then the action plan is then communicated to everyone, every stakeholder, including the deliverer of the training, to make sure that their program is being developed. That's followed up, we evaluate it, and then after 6 months, a minimum of 6 months, there's a return on investment calculation. So the organization, we've pulled together a web-based system that enables you to track the learning intervention and seeing that's delivered efficiently. We then come to the final part. So that's the organization. I've shown you the learning transfer system, which evaluates the learning program. The final part is the individual. The individual learner that ultimately is the one that decides whether learning is being transferred. And Bloom, in 2010, surprisingly found only a few individual features that are consistently strong in predicting transfer. However, the reality is that there's no magic bullets for leveraging transfer. What he means by that is that the alignment between the organization, the learning intervention, and the individual is absolutely fundamental. There are only a few individual characteristics that are employed by the learner when they're applying the learner, but we're talking about individual perceptions. That means we've got individual learners, and it will depend on the context, and it will depend on the learning program, and it will depend on the individual. And it's a bit like not a microscope, but a kaleidoscope, where an individual may be diverse, but what we're looking for is patterns in groups. And if we can establish what the personal characteristics are, we can enable a conversation to happen between the individual and then the supervision and the support that they're getting to enable them to transfer their learning. These are the 10 characteristics that have come from my research on the learning characteristics that people use to apply their learning. So I've worked through Holton's learning transfer system. I've looked and extended his work on the individual characteristics, and I've come up with 10 that contain attitudes, beliefs, values, and intentions, cognitive abilities and skills, and personality states, traits, and behaviors. Now, these are, my research looks at both formal and the characteristics used in formal and informal learning, and obviously has an impact with open learning. The more responsibility you're placing on the individual to manage their learning, the more they need to be capable of understanding how they learn, their particular preferences, in order to be supported in that learning. Cooper in 2017 said that there's a 37% success rate in open learning. And the problem is not the content of the learning, the design of the learning intervention. The problem is people managing their learning process. What I'm doing with these 10 characteristics is enabling a dialogue between the learner and the support to enable the learner to transfer their learning and gain the support to transfer that learning. So, step by step, this is both a ladder going up, but it's also a loop. So at the bottom, the motivation to learn and transfer is absolutely fundamental. And there's a difference between the motivation to learn, which is to understand, and the motivation to transfer, which is to do. And we have different motivations when we learn. Some people learn because they want to know everything there is to learn. And most of the research leans towards that way of being effective. Some people go into a learning intervention and they have a motivation called performance achievement. They only want to perform to the best of their peers. So as long as they're the best performer in their group, they're happy. The transfer is absolutely fundamental because it links in with the next bit, which is learner readiness. Are they prepared? Do they understand all the expectations that are being placed on them? Do they understand their own expectations? Can they see what the benefits are in what they're being asked to do? And their personal capacity. Do they have the confidence to do this? Do they have a can-do mentality? One of the key ones is the ability to reflect, review, project, and transfer. This is the individual learner's capability to look at their experience, transfer their experience. Am I doing something that I've done before? Am I doing is it the same that I've been asked to do? Or is it something that's a bit further away from what I usually apply? And can I generalize this learning to new contexts, which is a fundamental skill? What I need to do is then transform my new learning into this new context. And I need to create a vision of what I'm going to do, or to visualize it and perform what I'm being seen or visualizing or hearing or doing. The fifth one is learning strategies. This is a big gap. A guy called Thelmier says that there are no taxonomies that are readily accessible to apply learning. Bloom's taxonomy is too complex. So what I've been doing is working with two people at Cardiff to look at a simple taxonomy for learning strategies. And we came up with MUD. There are three types of learning. One is memorizing, which is memorizing facts, understanding, which is concepts, and doing, which is performance and behavioral modeling. So if I have those three strategies, I can go to any context and say, if I'm learning facts, I need to do things that enable me to recall and memorize those facts. If I need to understand, I need to ask about purpose, and there are particular compare and contrast, particular questions that I need to be asking to elicit understanding. And if I'm modeling, I need to practice. I need to be capable of watching somebody, of empathizing with them, and modeling their behavior. The sixth strategy is goal achievement and setting. So I need to be capable not only of setting goals, but have a drive towards achieving those goals. The seventh one is conscientiousness. Now, this is where we hit the issue of personality. Conscientiousness, a guy called Salgado said that conscientiousness was in every single occupation in every single country. I have problems with that. Once you define conscientious like the big five do in a broad categorization, you're using a catch-all. So in this, I talk about conscientiously being specifically methodical, systematic, and data-orientated. Resilience, the ability to bounce back, is a fundamental emotional managing and self-assessment and evaluation. Now, that is a ladder, but in self-assessment and evaluation, unless people are motivated to learn, unless people are prepared and learner ready, assessment and evaluation is very, very difficult. The clearer you are at the beginning, the more likely it is that you are at the end. And the intention and the behavior and the results from that follow. So what we produced is a questionnaire that enables you to assess a learner personal characteristics in learning transfer. So we're looking for an integrated system, and what we've produced is the 4Ds. That's a flexible, integrated, web-based system. It defines, describes, designs, and delivers, and it integrates every one of the stakeholders and offers a return on investment calculation with a minimum of 6 months. We can measure the efficiency of the learning intervention. And I'm really important about the efficiency rather than the effectiveness. It's the efficiency of the system that we're looking at. And the learning transfer systems inventory with its 16 enablers and validated in 24 countries and over 15,000 participants we've got the tool that enables us to data drive the contribution that HR makes and their seat at the executive table. And finally, we've got the ability to measure the effectiveness of the individual learning transfer. We've developed an app that is driven by the individual. Our desire is to change the face of learning, to enable learners to take more responsibility for their learning. And the second one is our learning characteristics inventory that's designed for learners, coaches, and training providers in order to help them help their learners transfer their content and their learning to their context. Whilst I've been going through this, my concern has been twofold. One is the community of practice called HR and enabling them to rightfully take their place at the executive table. So what we've done is we've designed 2 open learning programs. One is on strategic human resource development and learning transfer, where we've designed a program that takes you through every single one of the issues that I've talked through on this webinar. The second one we've done is a basic introduction to learning transfer. When we started this work about 7 years ago, what we found was there's a willful blindness on the part of human resource departments, because we were coming up with the questions that were difficult for them to answer, because they're more interested in results than in, quite rightly, than in the research. But what we found was the data provided them with something uncomfortable about their design, delivery, and management of the process of learning transfer. 80% of their emphasis was going on the design, not on the management of the learning transfer. We've provided in 3 a way of overcoming personal barriers to learning. We've developed an app that's both in Google Store and the App Store that an individual can plug into in any context, whether it's formal or informal. The fourth one is the learning transfer inventory that talks about the 16 process enablers to learning transfer and the impact of a learning intervention, and the learning characteristics inventory, which we're now putting forward to advocate to enable learners to sit down with their coaches and managers and enable them to transfer their learning. At that point, Ali, if you want to come back in.
Oops, yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for a very interesting and intriguing presentation. And folks, we are now open for question and answers. So if you have any questions, you could either insert in the Q&A box. I will be happy to read them over on your behalf, or you could equally raise your hand. I understand that some of you will be posting the questions in the chat box, but I would really appreciate if you could use the Q&A box, which is available on your console, to insert your questions, as it's easy for us to sort it out sequentially. So let me go to the question box. There are a few questions and comments, so let me read the first one from Brother Mansoor. Organizations in 2016 spent $359 billion on training, and the return on investment is not worth it, as concluded by Steve Klevitsky in his article titled Where Companies Go Wrong with Learning and Development, and published in the Harvard Business Review on October 2nd, 2019. That's more or less like a comment from the slides that you had shared. Any comment further, Mr. Smith, you want to?
Absolutely correct. agree with the analysis. I'm not sure I agree with the conclusion that may be drawn from it. The issue for me is that when I talk to chief executives, I get two impressions. I get two characteristically views of training and development. One is the positive guy who. The chief executive who believes in people development, who no matter what information he got, he's going to run his training program because he almost has a faith in training and development. That's good, and it can be misguided because what he needs is alignment with the training department, the business strategy, and the business. And unless he's got that, or she's got that, you're in cloud cuckoo land. The second one is a pessimist, who, as soon as the economy turns around, training and development is the first, what we call first out the gate, fog. And they're equally as naive because when the economy turns up, they have great difficulty getting the workforce skilled up to deal with the changes. So I think once we can get the issue of establishing where the actual impact of the HR function is when it comes to learning and development, give them responsibility for aligning and engaging everybody in that process, we've got a winner. And I've been in HR for 20 years. I'm still amazed that I'm reading articles that say HR has to justify its existence at the executive table. And we're still using happy sheets. Sorry, I get a lot excited when I start doing that. And do you want me to go to the second one, Ali? Or
yeah, let me read it from Dr. Mohamed. The question is, how can we assess the cost and return on informal training? Do we need to do so?
There's a 70-20-10 model coming out. That says 70% of the learning at work is informal learning, 20% is formal learning. My argument is that we used to send people off to college and university to be educated. And now the model in education is being questioned, whether universities are providing added value. And I know I'm experiencing it at the highest level at the moment with a professional doctorate. The issue for me is that we need to rethink the models about learning and not make distinctions between informal learning and learning, but make the distinction between learning and say what it is we're helping people to learn. Now, that puts a hell of a lot of responsibility on those who've traditionally been about getting things done and only getting things done. But then the issue becomes, how do we know it's cost effective? How do I know as an individual that my informal learning when I'm at work is effective? And it's only by me putting my expectations, my outcomes, my perceptions of what benefits I'll get out on the table that enables me to judge whether the journey that I'm about to take into this learning sea is actually going to be worth it. Okay?
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Some really good questions coming here, Ali.
Yeah, there's another one from Brother Khalid Al-Balbalisi. How do we consider the intangible factors when calculating ROI?
Well, the debate on what constitutes ROI is a really really interesting debate. There's lots of research that says the behavioral change and results are not connected. And what is connected into an ROI, you can go on large, expensive consultant-based programs and you can measure whatever it is you want to measure. Intangible factors are an interesting concept. I'd like a discussion with you to find out what you mean by intangible factors in calculating return on investment. We take the assumption that if it is a work-related issue, the only way you can do it is by connecting the individual or group with the results that you're expecting in the company. Again, I'm a little perplexed by intangible, if you like to follow that one up. But you can do a simple calculation. Your finance people have a tool called utility analysis, that if you just simply look at the change in behavior brought about by training, you can calculate a return on investment calculation. Now, as an HR manager, I used to devolve the benefit, what we call it, the rewards, the bonuses to our line managers. Now, if I had a system that enabled them to calculate what training and what learning they'd experienced, and the bonus was based on a calculation of their contribution and evidenced on their contribution, I've got a clear link with what is tangible and what isn't tangible. Will you be able to calculate that? Sorry, Ali, I'm reading.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Can I ROI with an e-learning platform courses? What my passion has been over these last 7 years to create a dialogue with the learner, the HR function, and the stakeholders and the business in the learning process. I've spent 40 years in people development looking at how you can look at that dialogue. If an e-learning platform is designed to help the individual, it's no good just throwing them into sink or swim. It needs a dialogue, a learning dialogue with the support mechanisms that you have to build into a e-learning platform. E-learning platforms do not divorce us from the need to support the learners from applying their learning. And the calculation of an ROI is going to be increasingly important, but it requires a dialogue to be undertaken. I'm going to go to the next one, Ali, if that's okay. Sure.
Yeah,
what's the difference between personal development and professional development? Sometimes semantics. I can professionally learn to be a master at anything that I do, but that might not necessarily lead to my personal development. It may. When I was doing my professional doctorate, I really frustrated my professor because I had the belief I wanted to learn everything there was to learn about learning transfer. And I got two responses. One was, Mike, you've only got to pass the course. The other one was, I would get really emotional. I'd have real periods of highs and lows with my confidence. And my peers were going through it, their program, simply getting through the program. So I guess the difference, and I assume that's what the word you meant, the difference between professional learning is I can open up the world if I want to, or I can simply pass this exam.
Mike, there are some questions in the chat box, so if you allow me, I'll take one or two of them. Mike?
Wait, sorry.
Yeah. I'm guessing there are a few questions in the chat box. If you allow me, I'll just pick one or two from there also.
Okay, I've got two more in my chat box. So shall I answer those and then you come in?
Yeah, sure.
What is the app name that Mr. Mike was talking about? If we can have the link. I'll send out these documents so you've got the links. So you'll have the full documentation. Ali will send them out after this as finished. What mistakes may happen with self-learners? Loads. If I take you back, can I do that? If I take you back to this, I'll just move it out a bit. what mistakes may happen with self-learners. They may not have the right motivation to apply and transfer. They may not have the right behaviors in learner readiness that they can't apply. They may see them as irrelevant. They may not have the confidence to do it. They may not have experienced it before. It's all in that process. Each one has both highs and lows, and there's loads of mistakes that you can make. Just the one I've given, the motivation to learn and the motivation to transfer. You can believe that what you're doing is you want to learn everything there is to know, but the only purpose of the learning is to get through that exam. There's loads of pitfalls. That's why I think this learning dialogue is so important. There was a recent radio program I was listening to. My daughter is a primary school teacher. She works with children from 6 to 8. And a bright little girl came to her and said, "Miss, why should I come to school?" So Dawn, my daughter-in-law, said, "I don't know, why are you asking the question?" She said, "Well, all I need to do is Google whatever I need to learn." So Dawn, my daughter-in-law, who's very bright too, just thought for a while and said, "I don't know why you need to school. Why don't you Google it?" And it is. There's so much learning from teachers. But the problem is, when I listened to a radio program recently from a teacher who said, "I opened the door on my new class, and there were 30 bright-eyed young individuals there, and I wanted to know and help each one of them, but I had to teach them maths." And sometimes that combination of what really good teachers do, and I'm starting to look at what makes support important. And there are people who had an enthusiasm for their subject that transmitted that enthusiasm to me. There were people who saw in me something I didn't see in myself and brought that out in me. And I really believe that teachers have that immense capacity to enthuse us and to bring out the best of us. What about line learning? I'm not sure what you mean. If you can give me more information.
Online learning.
Online learning, 37% success rate. I think it's the future. I think it is where organizations will go. And if they abdicate, it will be worse, because I think what they have to do is now look at how they're going to help people transfer their learning and not just dump them. Yeah. So I'm very optimistic about online learning. I'm very optimistic about open learning. Most of my ex-colleagues are writing open learning and are now being employed as coaches to enable that. And those who are really good are now facilitating learning in the organization. Am I active in KSA? Yes. I've been working with a public sector and a bank in KSA. Thank you very much. Enjoyed the experience. Most of my work now is based on getting people equipped. It doesn't matter where you are. This technology that we're using now is an example. And we are going to make sure that we provide online programs so that people can pick up the content and what I'm talking about, and that there is a process there that we have that enables us to help you coach your people, so we become coaches of the coaches to enable you to apply the learning. Skills mastery and competency-based education is being recently proposed along the utilization of emerging technologies to prepare an agile. What do you think? Absolutely are brilliant. I really have spent I'm a master trainer for an organization called Management Research Group in their leadership effectiveness analysis. And I've spent over 10 years working on competency-based, but research-based leadership development. And we've been using 360 degrees competency analysis in the public and private sector. It's not just a matter of going in and dumping them with competencies. It's a matter of establishing the fit between the organization and the competency and behavior of people. I've worked in banks who try and replicate the behaviors of one individual throughout the whole of the organization, and that individual being what they call the best performer in the organization. At least it's clarification. The best part of it is it engages people in a dialogue. The best part of it is that dialogue, if it enables an individual to talk about their talk about their competencies and their context, the coach is there to enable them to apply that learning. Because what happens in finance isn't always the same in research and development. We worked with a big, major car manufacturer, and they were running what we call a sheep dipping exercise, where every single one of their people was going on this leadership development program. What they were doing when we evaluated the program is there was a big gap in some of the organization's ability to apply their learning. Why? Because what they were applying in research and development or production wasn't the same as finance. So when I said that Bloom had said there are a few simple characteristics, but it's not a simple process. It needs that dialogue with the individuals. And that issue of skilled mastery, I think, is really important. All the evidence suggests that performance achievement will get you to be the best of your peers. The issue is that mastery orientation enables you to open up a wide field of learning that enables you to learn from most of the things that you're doing and not just rely on beating the hell out of your peer.
Yeah, there is a caller who has raised a hand, Mr. Mike. I'll just let Miss, if you allow me, Hannah Aldeeb has raised a hand. If you could please, Hannah, introduce yourself and ask the question. You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, Ali, are you asking me to read the last question?
Hannah Aldeeb has raised a hand. I think there's for an audio conversation. So I'm just asking to unmute yourself. Hannah, could you please unmute yourself?
Oh, okay. Hi, Anna. No.
Yeah.
While she's unmuted herself, technical courses that are binding for employment.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I've got you, Anna.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Assalamu alaikum. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your this meeting. I do get the benefit of it, but I already sent a question. I wrote a question. I sent it to you. Can you please answer it? Or if you want me, I can say it now.
Yes, please.
Do you think this informal learning by this way it will be impacted badly on people financially? So, as you know, some teachers or some they are working for learning. They are getting their and they are for income for their life by teaching informal learning. But this way they will going to lose some of their. It will be bad their financially or income, it will be lower.
And I think the debate about return on investment is, for some people, extremely useful. For justifying your existence, they want to know whether you're adding value. I think I'm going to link it with that the course question by Abdullah. Binding on point, do we need to provide ROI on training? For me, ROI is either very, very simple or very complex. That I think we need to say to people that people have benefited from the learning that they're getting. For me, that's the minimum requirement for a return on investment calculation. Now, if somebody is saying to me, I want to learn how to train my dog, right? Which happened to me recently with my wife when we got a new dog, a retriever. And so I started the same process. I'd start and say, okay, what standard do you want to achieve with Max, our new dog? And she said, I want to be the best in the class. So I said, okay, we can do that. How will you know you're the best in the class? I said, well, when I feel that Max is doing me proud. So I said, okay, how will you know when Max is doing you proud? When he sits, when I ask him to sit. And I said, that's a really simple. There was no cost. The cost was £20 for an hour's session. When you saw my wife's face, when Max sat, when she said, sit, Max, and gestured to him with a sign that she'd been showed, I asked her, did you get your £20 back? And she smiled and said, yes. I'm sorry if that's a fairly mundane example. Now, I've had chief executives who want to go through every single one of the cost of the program, the cost of the support, the cost of the materials, the cost of transport, the cost of the time spent away from the workbench, and all I'll go back to that question about what was the question about I can't remember the word, but the incidentals that are happening. For me, I'm not sure whether we need that and whether it's worth the time going into all that investment. I can provide it for you. It's a simple utility analysis of the job and the increase in performance. But informal learning, technical courses that binding for employment. I work with a public sector organization in the north of England up here who do technical courses for training. They're very restricted by the budget that they have, and asking them to do a return on calculation isn't a good return on investment. Okay?
Yes, thank you. And Mike, I understand that you're pressed on time and there are a couple of more questions, so I'll let you rather decide if you can take at least one or two more based on your own choices.
Okay. Amro, you're not an advocate of e-learning yourself, though I'm a director of training and evaluation in my institute. One reason why is mainly because the lack of true sense experience of education, not to mention learners' motivation, aptitude toward it in the world full of distracting factors. Comments. I've just experienced. It wasn't open learning, but being given full responsibility, doing the professional doctorate, and it's hard. It is extremely hard. The ability to take what someone says to you and find an example that fits with your experience when you're learning, is very difficult. And that's that process. I'm just going to move this. That's that process we call reflect, review, project, and transform. If I reflect on something, I'm looking at using, I'm trying to work through your example. If I use an e-learning program, I have to reflect on the e-learning program and find its relevance and applicability to me in this new experience. It may not be what we call a near transfer issue. It may be something that's not in my area, but I've got to be capable of reflecting on that and taking the learning from it. And that can be very difficult. And sometimes I need somebody to help me reflect. So my wife regularly is a source for me that enables me to reflect on what I'm learning and to try and apply it. The review bit is whether what I've reflecting on relates to my current position. And that process isn't easy. It means I've got to take the reflection, I've got to bring it into the immediate, and I've got to see what the implications are for me now. If then I review and say, oh, yeah, now I've got it, it relates to this experience I've had in the past, and what I can do now is transfer this to this new situation. And what I'm doing there is projecting into the future. And I've got to be capable of applying this into the new context. Now, if I've done that, that's a simple act. But sometimes what I'm doing absolutely challenges my existing beliefs and values. And if that happens, it's not a simple task. It's a transformation. And whilst I've been learning, there are times when I've gone back on learning experiences, some of which have been excellent, some of which have been really bad, but they've challenged my assumptions about the way people learn and some of my assumptions about the teaching that I had. So that process from somebody who's in an educational context is extremely difficult in e-learning unless you've got the support mechanism in to do it. Now, I look at some of the teachers that I've had and I think they're brilliant. I could learn from them. And some of the teachers that I'm learning from, maybe not, just are simply transmitters of information. And I think that's not using their skill. And like the thing I talked about, the teacher who said, I opened the door and there were 30 faces who I wanted to get to know, but I had to teach them maths. Sometimes our curriculums are getting in the way of helping people develop because it's the curriculum that's become the important thing. And I look at a number of schools in the UK and I can show you schools where the curriculum has taken the place of helping students learn. Sorry, that's one of my bones. I really think we're moving towards a standardizing process. And I don't mind buying a shirt that's either a medium, large, or because I know I can get away with my cuffs being too long. But when I'm talking about standardizing individuals, that's where I have big problems. Thanks, Amro, for that question. Ahmed, I'm trying to develop professionally in my career. There are more that I could ever absorb. What is the way to develop and keep evaluating my accomplishments? I work in the health and safety profession as a safety engineer. Please advise. Absolutely critical. Thank you for all the work that you're doing in this time, and my heart goes with you. The fact that you've asked me that question gives me confidence, Ahmed, both in the sector that you're working with and your attitude, that you have the answer in the question. If you spend time reviewing your achievements, summarizing your understanding of what you've done, identifying whether what you've achieved is what you wanted to achieve and what further you could have done to make it more effective and efficient. And finally, celebrating your achievements. And that's important. Celebrating achievements. I'm sure your role as a health and safety professional, what you have, it sounds like, is sometimes it may hit you with self-efficacy. And I can understand that, because in health and safety, particularly, I want to be a perfectionist. I want to make sure that everything is right, because the people in my care are important, and what I do is important and significant in their lives. So there are times when my desire to apply things is important, and it knocks my confidence. So one of the other things is keep your confidence going.
Mike, do you want to take any more, or it's up to you now? I know we have a couple of more questions, but I'm equally pressed on time. And
well, Mansour's giving me articles to read. That's brilliant. Thank you, Mansour. I will read it and get back to you.
Brilliant.
Do you advise me with a smart way to the ROI and receive knowledge from learning intervention? Yeah, do the things. If you use the things that I've said, start with a learning transfer systems inventory. And what I'll download, what I'll give to Ali, will give you the link to the learning transfer systems inventory. Once you've done that, that will give you the data that you can then use to analyze the effectiveness and efficiency. Well, effectiveness will come from the next bit, but the efficiency of your learning intervention. Once you've done that, then the ROI is part of the 4Ds mechanism that I showed you. And you can simply plug into the ROI part of the 4D thing to do it. So, yeah, go to the Learning Transfer Systems inventory, find a group that you want to practice it with, get the results from that, and then come back to us and we'll give you the next stage for ROI calculation. What are the most trendy training programs I consider to be the best, especially during pandemic, to refresh employees' commitment and engagement? What is the most trendy? No idea. I should think anything that gets people socializing again, anything that gets people sharing the community of practice that some of us have experienced, where people are helping each other and learning together, I think is significant. Wessam, good luck. We'll be more than willing to help. Anything that you need, just give us a ring. Do you advise for a smart way of measuring ROI? I just keep on saying there's no easy ways. What am I training? What will be the future of learning along with digitization? This might be the new method of learning, as it will be without limited doing. Yeah, spot on, Mustafa. It is that, like my daughter-in-law experienced, if they're challenging now authority at 8-year-old, and an 8-year-old can say, why do I have to come to school? They're challenging existing ways of doing things. But the system's still limping behind because we're still based on an expert model. Most of my colleagues who were deliverers of training loved training because it got them attention. They loved edutainment because that was the way they got their kicks. They travel around the world, meeting loads of people, getting lots of attention. Now they've had to move to open learning programs. Now they're having to face how to apply it. Most of the progressive organizations are now recruiting them to coach people in the content they were delivering. And they're coaching groups of people. What they're having to do now is to facilitate. Now, make the distinction between a coach and a facilitator. Facilitators have diagnostics that enable them to work with groups of people to implement change in systems. And that's what the good colleagues, the ones that are most experienced, are now doing as trainers. They've moved from trainers to coaches to facilitators in organizations to help organizations address the issue of how to accelerate the application of learning. If we invest in online exams, that most of the online programs that I do ask you to produce tests and exams. The validity of the exam depends on the organization. So our course is validated by Coursera. We had to have a structure in the open learning program that provided them with the ability to test whether people understood. The problem that I still have with organizations, again, is one that we're hitting. How do you evaluate whether the learning program has had impact? Can I have your phone number? Dad, my Skype is Mike Smith 3L. I want to keep the band on my phone. But I'd be more than willing to respond to a Skype call if you want. Is that it?
Yes, I'm glad you took all the questions, pretty much. We're doing the moderator's job, so I appreciate your time for that also, Mike.
I enjoyed it. It was good. The questions were really, really good. And then shows a lot of issues that are coming out in that part of the world. Yeah.
Great questions indeed, audience and attendees. I really appreciate it. I mean, interesting questions and a very, very intriguing experience. Questions. We might have missed a couple of them, so we apologize because of the time constraints. But I would like to end and conclude with a note, Mike, on behalf of GPMA, I really want to thank you for taking the time to deliver this live webinar. Indeed, it turned out to be quite an interactive experience, as we had tons of questions that are popping up on the Q&A box, as well as we missed a couple of them on the chat box. But I hope people will be able to get back to you based on the contact screen that Mike is currently sharing and on the screen. So please feel free to get back to him. I find him a very humble person and very responsive. So I'm sure you will enjoy your engagement with Mike. So, but with that note, I would like to end. Before I conclude, let me take an opportunity to share my screen. Folks, this webinar was arranged by GPMA, which is the Global Performance Management Academy. This is the new initiative that is being launched, and we are a professional society dedicated to the excellence in strategic planning and enterprise performance management, with a prime mission to provide services and resources pertinent to enterprise performance management. We are ambitious to create one of the largest repositories on the performance management, and currently we are offering a number of certification courses. We will be adding number of them, tons of them. We are engaging the global experts. As you can see, for the past month or two or so, we have engaged some good high-end global speakers to bring the good global practices to us. We are not confined on the webinars just to performance, as we are focusing mostly on the variety of topics right now. But on the platform, it is purely a strong archive repository on the performance management practices and enterprise. So I highly recommend to please visit gpmacademy.org. Once again, www.gpm, which is for Global Performance Management, gpmacademy.org, and you will get to see a lot of information that is already populated. There's a complete competency framework on the GPMA work modules, methodologies. There are a number of certification courses. You will get an access to all the webinar archives that we are doing every week, 1 or 2 webinars. And this is just a great platform. So please do visit it and share your feedback with us. We would love to hear back from you guys. So thank you very much with that note. And before I conclude, any quick remarks, Mike, that you would like to give before we dismiss out?
Sorry?
Any quick remarks that you would like to give before we discuss?
I really enjoyed the webinar. I enjoyed the tone of the questions as well, and really value the culture in the Middle East that's so caring as well.
Great, great. Indeed, very learning receptive audience today, and we really enjoyed it. And once again, the whole audience, thank you very much for...
Can I just say, Ali, I'll send you the new slides, because I added an additional slide in. So I'll send you an update with the slides and the references that people are asking for.
Sure. Please do send it to me, and we'll be uploading on the website, so you may have an access of this whole content presentation, both video recording and the PowerPoint presentation, and the other detailed information that Mike will be sharing with us. We'll be uploading in our website. So please, again, stay tuned to gpmacademy.org. So with that note, I would like to end and conclude once again with a note of thanks to Mike Smith for sharing this valuable information with us through this platform. So look forward to seeing you all. Please stay tuned to gpmacademy.org for accessing the recorded version, and even equally to learn about our upcoming programs, certification courses, and of course, upcoming webinars. So with that note, I would like to end and conclude. So you all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. Thank you very much, Mike. So you all have a good day.
Salam.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Assalamu alaikum.